They laughed as they grabbed her. But when Jack Reacher stepped from the shadows, no one was laughing. The alley yawned before her like a wound in the city, its walls slick with a sheen of rain and neon reflections dancing across puddles. A single flickering bulb cast uneven shadows, turning rusted pipes and peeling posters into grotesque silhouettes. She paused just inside, keys clenched between trembling fingers, heart hammering as distant laughter echoed from the street behind her. The hum of traffic felt a world away. Take a second to subscribe. It really helps. Thanks. Now back to the story. Each footstep carried her deeper into the narrowing corridor, where trash bins reeked of decay and the night air pressed in like a living thing. Her breath caught when she noticed movement ahead, shadows shifting against the brick, figures emerging one by one. 5 of them, their faces hidden beneath hoods, closing in like predators. They spread out in a semicircle, their low voices vibrating through the damp stillness. She backed up, shoulders brushing against a metal door, every nerve ablaze. A mocking chuckle drew her gaze to the nearest man, stepping forward with a swagger that reeked of arrogance. He raised a hand and gestured at her, dark eyes gleaming with intent. Panicked, she edged around the bin, keys raised in a feeble show of defense. Behind her, the alley mouth remained open to the street, an exit she could reach, if only she dared risk a sprint through their trap. Her pulse roared in her ears as one thug lunged, fingers closing on her arm. Pain exploded, and she cried out, stumbling against the cold brick wall. The other 4 closed in, their silhouettes looming, words dripping with menace. In that moment of bleak desperation, something shifted. From the deeper shadows, a taller figure detached himself, broad-shouldered, purposeful. He moved without a sound, silhouette cutting a path between predator and prey. She met his gaze for the briefest second, calm, unflinching, and utterly in control, before everything else fell into place. The shadows in the alley suddenly had an unseen 6th presence, and whatever terror had driven her there began to turn on her assailants. The diner's neon sign buzzed to life as she stepped through the front door, the scent of grease and coffee greeting her like an old friend. The tiny bell chimed overhead, and she tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, adjusting the pen clipped to her apron. Inside, the usual trio of late-night regulars sat hunched over steaming mugs, newspaper pages stained with yesterday's headlines. She offered them a practiced smile and slid smoothly into her station, wiping down the counter with a rag that had seen too many nights like this. Behind her, the kitchen door creaked open, and the cook, his face framed by the yellow glow of the exhaust hood, nodded a silent greeting as he adjusted a sizzling sausage patty on the flat top. The air hummed with the hiss of steam and the clatter of dishes, a familiar soundtrack she'd learned to pace her steps to. Orders scribbled across her notepad like a secret code. 3 pancakes for table 4, a BLT with extra mayo, coffee black for the man in the corner. She poured herself a cup, bitter, black, and took a slow sip, watching the fluorescent lights reflect off the chrome stools lined up like sentinels. Outside, the evening chill pressed against the windows, but inside was warm, a bubble of routine that kept the darkness at bay. A new car rolled up out front, headlights cutting through the gloom. She straightened her posture, anticipating another face she'd come to know by smell and mannerism. Her shift had barely begun, but already she felt the familiar knot of exhaustion settle in her shoulders. She'd traded stories with bored teenagers at the counter, taken orders from overworked cab drivers, and comforted the lonely souls clutching steaming cups as if they held the answers to everything. Still 2 hours until closing. Still enough time for one more customer to wander in, seeking a plate of eggs and a human touch. She refilled a mug, nodded at the cook as the next order slid from the line, then turned toward the door with pen poised. It was the simplest of gestures, but in that neon-lit sanctuary, every nod, every scribbled note, every quiet thank you was a lifeline for her and for those who came seeking a brief respite from their own nights. Just another shift, another chance to hold the darkness at bay. She noticed it first in the coffee cup, a ring of oil that hadn't been there moments ago, shimmering dark against the pale ceramic. Her brow furrowed as she lifted the mug, swirled it, and caught movement reflected in the window, a figure lingering just beyond the neon glow. She set the cup down, fingertips brushing the cool countertop. The diner's door remained closed, but footsteps echoed faintly on the sidewalk outside. She glanced toward the open street, where empty chairs waited under flickering streetlights. Nobody should be out here now, she thought, but the uneasy feeling settled in her chest and refused to leave. Back inside, the cook paused mid-turning of a burger, spatula hovering in the air. He raised an eyebrow, following her gaze toward the window. She shook her head, forcing a wry smile. "Probably just a late shift worker," she murmured, though her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. She refilled the sugar dispenser, tapping it twice before pouring. Even a mundane felt charged. Every clang of a spoon against a bowl, every hiss of the espresso machine seemed louder, sharper. The regulars barely noticed, their whispers and page turns continuing as if anchored in routine. But she felt the air tighten. A sudden draft skittered across the floor as the door cracked open. Cold air spilled in, carrying the metallic tang of danger. She looked up to see a stranger step inside, silhouette backlit by streetlight. He shook off raindrops, hooded coat drenched, and moved to the counter without a word. Her heart slammed against her ribs as she paused midward. Something about him felt off, yet his posture was relaxed, unhurried, and his calm blue eyes met hers with an almost clinical detachment. A shiver crawled up her spine, not from the cold, but from recognition of that same unsettling watchfulness she'd glimpsed outside. She handed him the menu, voice barely steadier than a whisper. "What can I get you?" He took it, eyes scanning the options as though reading a code. Outside, the shadows pressed closer against the windows, and the unease in her gut warned that tonight, the darkness wouldn't stay outside for long. He slid onto a stool near the far end of the counter, boots softly thudding against the linoleum. She brought a tall glass of water, watching droplets bead and trail down its sides before setting it gently in front of him. Without a word, he lifted it, and a thin clink of glass on glass echoed in the quiet diner. The regulars glanced up but quickly returned to their own worlds, forks scraping plates, newspapers rustling. Even the cook paused, spatula midair, as though the sound had sliced through the familiar hum of appliances. For a moment, everything stilled. She forced a polite smile. "Anything to eat with that?" He tilted the glass, eyes catching the fluorescent light. "Just water," he said, voice low measured. He watched her for a beat before taking a slow sip, lips barely brushing the rim. The clink came again as he set the glass back down, softer this time, like a heartbeat. Her fingertips trembled as she reached for a napkin, but she steadied herself, folding it neatly. Behind her, the tick of the wall clock seemed amplified, each second dragging out longer than the last. She felt the pull of his gaze as she turned to refill her own water, the silver pitcher cold and heavy in her hand. A collision of voices rose from the corner booth. One of the regulars, the retired teacher, chuckling at the day's news. Plates scraped the counter, coffee mugs clattered, and for a second the ordinary din of the night returned. Yet every so often, she caught him watching, the subtle pivot of his shoulders or the slight lift of his brow betraying that he was far from ordinary. She poured water for herself, then hesitated, glass halfway to her lips. The crinkle of the ice inside her guest's glass punctuated the silence once more, a crisp, tactile note that felt almost deliberate. He caught her hesitation and offered a slight nod, eyes unreadable. She slipped into the empty stool beside him, placing her glass down with a matching clink. He acknowledged the gesture with a nearly imperceptible tilt of his head. Side by side, they sat in the half-light of the diner, the soft chorus of clinking glasses weaving between them like a fragile thread. In that fragile resonance, the night's tension throbbed, an unspoken promise that something significant was about to unfold. A sudden burst of static from the jukebox cut through the hushed clinks, and she tensed, glancing toward the door. The bell jingled as a tall man in a leather jacket slipped in, eyes scanning the room until they settled on the hooded stranger at the counter. He moved with casual purpose, a predator sizing up prey. The stranger's head tilted slightly, as if he'd felt the shift in the air. She pressed a hand to her apron pocket, fingers curling around the edge of her notepad. The regulars barely noticed. Their conversation lulled back to life like a radio returning after a brief outage. But she felt the pressure building, as though the walls themselves had leaned in. The newcomer took 3 deliberate steps toward the counter. Each footfall rang hollow against the tiles. Her pulse pounded beneath her collarbone. She met the stranger's eye, hoping for reassurance, but found only that same unreadable calm. He took a last sip of water, set the glass down without a sound, and stood. He didn't move toward the man in the jacket. Instead, he angled slightly, blocking the waitress's view, a silent shield. The man hesitated, lips twitching into a half-smile as he approached the counter. He dropped onto the stool she had been occupying moments before, elbows resting on the edge. "Hey," he drawled, voice low with a rough edge. "How's the night?" She plastered on a polite expression, heart slamming against her ribs. "Quiet so far," she managed. Her voice felt small. Behind her back, she felt the stranger shift as if bracing. The man's gaze flicked to the stranger, then back to her. "You," he nodded toward her name tag. "What's a pretty thing working this graveyard shift?" The words slithered across the counter. She swallowed, mind racing for a safe reply. "It's just work," she said softly. The man's smirk widened. He leaned in closer, proximity dissolving the space between them, and she recoiled, instinctual. The stranger at the counter didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped forward into the faint circle of neon light, shoulders squared. The man's eyes narrowed. He glanced sideways, realization flickering. The stranger's presence shifted the dynamic. An unseen tension snapped tight. He straightened, lips curling into a sneer, but before he could speak again, the jukebox crackled, drowning out the moment. In that burst of music, something unspoken passed between waitress and protector. The first line had been drawn. The streetlights outside dimmed as a chill wind whispered down the alley entrance, and the diner's door swung open with a reluctant groan. She glanced up from the ticket book just as the first of them slipped in, a broad-shouldered man whose gait was all confidence, eyes scanning like a hawk. Behind him came the second, tall and lean, hands buried in the pockets of his hoodie. One by one, the others drifted in, filling the narrow space between counter and wall. 5 shadows folded themselves around her like gathering storm clouds. The cook froze, spatula poised mid-flip, while the regulars murmured beneath their breath, sensing the change in atmosphere. The leader stepped forward, boots clicking against the tile. His companions fanned out, creating a semicircle that cut off any easy escape. Their faces remained obscured beneath hoods and low-brimmed caps, but the menace in their posture was unmistakable. Loose grips on concealed fists, predatory smiles flickering at the corners of their lips. She set down the order pad, heart thudding as she realized there would be no quick greeting this time. The leader leaned in, voice a low rumble. "Last call, sweetheart," he said, as though savoring the words. The others laughed softly, a collective sound that felt like claws scratching tile. Her gaze flicked to the stranger at the counter, but he remained motionless, as though carved from stone. She met his calm eyes, drawing a fraction of courage from his steady presence. The third thug, shorter but stocky, stepped closer, elbow bumping her hip. She inhaled sharply, steadying herself against the bar's edge. The fourth and fifth hovered behind, silent vultures circling potential prey. She tried to keep her voice even as she whispered, "I'm sorry, but we're closed to new orders." The leader's smile sharpened. "We'll see about that," he replied, each word slow, deliberate. His hand brushed across the counter, swiping her glass of water aside with a harsh clatter. Glass shivered on its stem, droplets splashing across her apron. The cook set down his spatula, tension crackling in the air. A single bead of sweat slid down her temple, and she swallowed against the rise of panic. In that frozen moment, the five figures looked like executioners waiting on a final nod. But beyond them, just beyond their circle, the tall stranger rose from his stool, shoulders squared, ready to turn the tide. The narrow alley yawned before her, trash bins looming like silent sentinels as she stumbled backward, heart pounding against her ribs. Rainwater trickled along the cracked pavement, carrying scraps of yesterday's refuse into grimy puddles. Behind her, the five men closed in, their shadows stretching long in the dim glow of a lone street lamp. A dumpster loomed at the far end, a steel beast stained with rust and old graffiti. She backed toward it, arms raised defensively, breath ragged. The leader's smirk gleamed under his hood as he took a step forward, anticipation sharp in his tone. "Thought you'd run, huh?" Her fingers scraped against the cold metal lid, searching for purchase, but every muscle trembled. The second thug flicked his wrist, revealing a glinting blade. It caught the lamplight, sending a narrow beam across her eyes. She flinched, the knife's whisper reminding her how alone she was. A bottle shattered nearby, one of the men tossing it aside, and the crack of glass jolted her senses. She lunged around the dumpster's edge, adrenaline surging, but her escape was blocked. Two thugs intercepted her path, grinning as they closed ranks. The third and fourth pressed from either side, hands tightening on her arms. Pain flared where fists dug into her shoulders. She gasped, twisting, but there was no leverage, no hope of wrenching free against their combined weight. The leader advanced, boots splashing in a shallow puddle. She shut her eyes, breath stuttering, mind racing. Every instinct screamed to fight, but fear rooted her in place. A mocking laugh drifted through the alley, echoing off brick walls. Then, out of the corner of her eye, a figure emerged from the deeper shadows, tall, broad, moving with a predator's grace. He closed the distance in two silent strides, presence shifting the moment's gravity. The five men paused, confusion flickering across their faces. The blade caught once more in lamplight as one thug raised it, but before he could strike, the stranger was between them and her, body coiled like a spring. In that razor-thin heartbeat, the air snapped tight. Predator confronted predator. Rain drummed on the metal lid, and the alley held its breath. She watched, heart pounding, as the unseen protector squared his shoulders, ready to turn the world in her favor. He stepped forward, the faint hum of neon seeping through his silence. The thugs recoiled, uncertain, as his shadow merged with theirs on the damp brick. The leader's grin faltered. He straightened, voice low and dangerous as he leaned toward the waitress. "You think he's going to save you?" Her pulse thundered, but she barely dared breathe. Before she could answer, the stranger's hand shot out, fingers curling around the leader's wrist with a vice-like grip. The knife clattered to the pavement, blade skittering against the grime. For a heartbeat, terror flashed across the others' faces. Then the leader laughed, a howl of bravado meant to hide the tremor in his chest. He jerked free, but the stranger's grip tightened, eyes locking onto his with cold calculation. The world narrowed to their two silhouettes, framed by flickering light. "Leave," the stranger murmured, voice a silent blade. The words carried without volume, pressed against their ears like steel. The thugs exchanged glances, uncertainty bleeding into their bravado. The leader spat on the ground, rage flaring. "Or what?" he rasped, fists clenching. "You gonna make us?" The stranger shifted, body coiled and ready, yet he didn't release the wrist. The tension between them crackled, as if the air itself awaited the outcome. The leader's bravado wavered. His jaw worked as he weighed the risk. Behind them, rain drummed on the dumpster, punctuating the standoff. The waitress watched, breath caught in her throat, as the leader's eyes flicked to the blade, discarded at his feet. He glanced at his friends, four pairs of uncertain eyes. A low chuckle slipped from him, bitter and sharp. He glanced back at the stranger, then at the shuttered businesses lining the alley. With a final curse, he nodded, signaling his crew. The five moved as one, backs rigid, slipping into the shadows like smoke receding from a flame. When they reached the mouth of the alley, the leader paused, head turned once more. But the stranger's gaze never wavered, fixed and unyielding. Then the night swallowed them, and the only sound left was the distant hum of traffic and the whisper of her own racing heart. Her knees felt weak as the echo of retreating footsteps faded, leaving only the patter of rain and the distant hum of the city. The stranger released the leader's wrist and stepped back, creating space that felt impossible to cross. She stared at him, chest heaving, gaze flickering between his calm figure and the dark alley where danger had just melted away. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the dumpster lid, knuckles white. The knife lay a few feet away, its blade glinting faintly in the neon light, proof of how close she had come to something far darker than spilled drinks and rude customers. A shiver ran down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. She swallowed, voice barely a whisper. "Thank you." The words felt inadequate, fragile against the night's weight. He inclined his head slightly, expression unreadable. She searched his eyes for reassurance, but they held only quiet vigilance, as though he were scanning for unseen threats still lurking in the shadows. Memories of other nights flooded her, doors left ajar, footsteps on deserted sidewalks, hands brushing too close under flickering street lamps. Moments she dismissed as paranoia now pulsed vividly in her mind, each one a reminder of how vulnerable she'd felt before he arrived. She glanced around the alley, walls closing in, bins standing like sentinels of her near demise. Tears prickled at the corners of her eyes, threatening to spill. She blinked hard, mind swimming with the image of those 5 looming figures, their laughter still echoing in her ears. A sudden gust of wind rattled a loose metal shutter, and she jumped, heart leaping into her throat. She pressed her back against the dumpster, knees bending as if to sink to the ground. The stranger moved to stand beside her, a silent presence that steadied the world around her. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, trying to tame the tremors that rippled through her. Fear clung to her like a second skin, one she couldn't peel away without his help. Yet even as her chest tightened, a flicker of something else emerged. Relief. She wasn't alone. When she opened her eyes, his silhouette stood firm against the alley's depth, a barrier between her and the night's terrors. And in that moment, her fear shifted from paralyzing dread to cautious hope. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she watched him retrieve her fallen notepad from the ground, slipping it into the pocket of his coat. Rage flickered in her chest, at the men who had cornered her, at the knife's cold gleam, at the trembling that hadn't left her since. She balled her hands into fists, knuckles reddening as she squeezed. He turned, noticing the tension in her posture, and stepped closer, voice low. "You okay?" His question hovered between them, gentle but unyielding. She forced a nod, jaw working as she swallowed past the lump in her throat. Her voice cracked. She glanced down at her clenched fists, and the sight of her own trembling skin made her chest tighten. How had she gone from confident waitress to terrified prey so fast? He reached out, hand hovering just above hers, and she recoiled for a heartbeat before realizing he meant to help unclench her fingers. Reluctantly, she let him ease her grip, breath flowing back through her constricted chest. The rain trailed down her arms, cooling the blood that had heated with adrenaline. A low rumble of thunder rumbled overhead, and she shivered, breathing out unevenly. She looked up at his steady face, so calm against the storm of her emotions. Behind them, the alley remained deserted, the threat vanished, yet her body still braced for violence. She wiped a sleeve across her cheek, smearing away the moisture that might have been tears or rain. Warmth blossomed in her fists again, this time from determination. She wasn't helpless. She refused to be helpless. He caught her eye and gave a slight nod, as if recognizing her inner shift. She took a step forward, fists unclenching fully, and kicked a discarded bottle aside, sending it skittering across the pavement. The sound sounded like a challenge. Her heart steadied. She would not let fear own her. Side by side, The waitress and her silent guardian faced the dim alley, ready for whatever shadows still lingered. Soft footsteps echoed from deeper within the alley, steady and unhurried. She froze mid-breath, the pulse in her throat throbbing so loudly she feared it would give her away. He shifted beside her, silent as a shadow, and she pressed back against the dumpster, heart hammering. The footfalls paused, then resumed, closer now, deliberate as if someone knew exactly where to tread. Her hand curled around the edge of the dumpster lid, nails digging into cold metal. The distant hum of traffic faded, replaced by the single, solitary rhythm of those steps. He raised a finger to his lips, eyes narrowing as he scanned the gloom ahead. She followed his gaze, noticing the silhouette materialize in the misty pool of light near the far wall. A lone figure, hands shoved in coat pockets, head tipped down beneath a soaked hood. No weapon was visible, but she knew better than to assume. A gust of wind rattled a loose sign above, and the stranger moved a hair's breadth forward, body coiled like a spring. The footsteps halted again. The stranger glanced over his shoulder at her, a subtle signal, and she stepped back, letting him take point. The figure's voice cut through the cold air, low and unfamiliar. "Thought you'd left?" it said, tone casual but edged with something darker. The stranger didn't answer immediately. He shifted his stance, feet planted firmly as if ready for whatever came next. She swallowed, knees weak. The visitor stepped into fuller light. Rain dripping from his sleeves, shoulders squared, eyes glinting beneath the hood. Each drop slid down his coat like a ticking clock. The stranger beside her took a measured step forward, and the newcomer straightened, tilting his head. Silence stretched taut between them, a wire ready to snap. Then the stranger spoke, voice calm and even, "This is hers." His simple statement reverberated, solid and unyielding. The newcomer's lips curved into a half-smile, amused, perhaps defiant. He took one step forward, and she braced herself, instincts igniting. In that charged moment, the three stood locked in a silent standoff, the alley shadows ready to erupt into violence at any flicker of movement. He stood just beyond the pool of light, shoulders relaxed yet coiled like spring. From the corner of his eye, he took in every detail. The way the newcomer's coat hung heavy with rain, the stranger's silent readiness at her side, even the droplets that traced the edges of discarded flyers on the brick wall. His gaze flicked to the waitress, her wide eyes, shaky breath, fists still partially clenched, and he registered the tremors in her frame. Reacher's mind cataloged threats the way others collected postcards. The alley's narrow dimensions, the nearest exit blocked by dumpsters, the slick pavement beneath unpredictable footing. 5 against 2, but numbers meant nothing to him. He weighed the angles, the likely paths each combatant would take, the minute shifts in posture that spoke louder than words. The intruder's half-smile told him more than any boast. Confidence born of ignorance. He tossed a stray pebble with his foot, listening to it skitter across the concrete. Sound, he knew, could betray more than stealth. Ahead, the stranger's jaw tightened, fingers brushing the edge of the counterweight he carried in his coat. Reacher didn't move, but his breathing slowed, a steady metronome. He noted the tension coiling in the newcomer's shoulders, the quiver of anticipation in his stance. He gauged distance, 3 paces to her, 4 to the stranger, 6 to the newcomer, 7 to the far wall. Enough to act, but only if necessary. Time stretched as the rain drummed against rusted pipes overhead. The waitress's breath hitched. She glanced at Reacher's silhouette as if seeking permission to flee. He offered a subtle shake of his head, "Stay calm." His presence alone was a barrier, a quiet warning that any misstep would be met without hesitation. He slipped a hand into his pocket, fingers brushing a familiar shape. A steel cylinder no thicker than a marker, but capable of severing bone or saving life. The newcomer's smirk faltered for a heartbeat, just enough. Above them, the neon sign sputtered, casting his face in brief bursts of pale blue light. He observed. He waited, because when you'd learn to read danger like ink on paper, anticipation was the deadliest weapon of all. The alley fell into an oppressive hush, broken only by the steady drip of water from a rusted pipe. She pressed herself against the wall, fingertips brushing damp bricks, every nerve aflame. Reacher stood a pace ahead, shoulders squared, eyes unreadable as he assessed the space. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears, yet she felt anchored by his presence. No words passed between them. None were needed. Around them, the newcomer shifted, boots scraping the world-worn concrete, throat clearing softly. He waited, confidence flickering like a faulty neon bulb overhead. Reacher's silence was a weapon honed by decades of emptiness. He didn't flinch as the intruder's hand twitched toward his pocket. He didn't step back when the man took another half-step closer. Instead, he inhaled quietly, letting the newcomer fill the stillness with his own doubt. The woman watched as the tension coiled between them, drawn tight like a bowstring. Each breath they took seemed synchronized to an unspoken dance. One wrong move, and the lethal choreography would begin. She forced herself to breathe slowly, matching Reacher's calm steadiness. Drip, drip. A raindrop splashed onto a discarded wrapper at their feet. The newcomer's smile wavered, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. He glanced at her, searching for weakness, but found only resolve etched in her trembling stance. Reacher's gaze flicked to the knife half buried in the grime. He timed his move, no hurry, no waste. A breath later, he shifted his weight, subtly drawing the intruder's focus. In that single beat, everything changed. The newcomer's smirk fell away as he realized the gap closing. He tensed, raising a hand to counter, but Reacher's fingers curled around his wrist, stopping him mid-motion with effortless force. Her gasp echoed, sharp and raw, while the remaining energy in the alley shattered the silence. Reacher didn't speak. He didn't have to. The calculated quiet had done its work, unraveling the threat without a shot fired, without a shout. The woman exhaled, relief and awe mingling as the world shifted back into motion around them. A soft grunt slipped from the intruder's lips as Reacher's grip tightened, twisting his wrist just enough to drop the knife into a puddle with a metallic plink. The man's eyes widened, adrenaline and surprise mixing in a flash of pain, but Reacher held him steady, body angled to block any further aggression. The other four thugs watched from the alley entrance, hesitation rippling through their ranks. Reacher's calm dominance radiated outward, a silent command that froze them in place. The waitress stepped back, heart pounding, as Reacher released the man's wrist and slid the fallen blade closer to her boot. She nudged it toward her, foot barely brushing the handle, and picked it up with trembling fingers. He gave a slight nod, an invitation to arm herself. She swallowed hard, pressing the knife against her palm, its weight a strange comfort. Reacher turned his attention to the nearest thug beyond the circle, gaze cool and unwavering. Without raising his voice, he took a deliberate step forward, causing the man to jerk back, uncertainty flickering in his stance. Then another step, and the space between them felt charged. The stranger's breath hitched. At the same moment, the cook's voice drifted faintly from the diner door, a shout of confusion and alarm. The regulars' murmurs grew louder, drawing the remaining thugs' eyes toward the sound. In that split second, Reacher recognized their fleeting attention and leaned in, voice low yet clear enough for all to hear. "This ends now." His words slid through the rain-damp air like a blade. The leader's face contorted, anger, fear, pride battling for control. He glanced at his companions, saw their uncertainty, and finally stepped back, gesturing imperceptibly. One by one, they retreated, shoulders hunched, eyes flickering between Reacher and the dark exit. The waitress exhaled as they disappeared into the night. Reacher watched them go, silent sentinel, until the last shape dissolved beyond the alley mouth. Then he turned to her, expression softening for the first time since he arrived, and offered her a hand, steady, reassuring, a bridge back to safety. A single shout shattered the retreat's rhythm as the leader halted, boots sliding against wet asphalt. The first thug stumbled forward, uncertainty replacing swagger. His foot caught on the edge of a broken bottle, and he pitched face first toward the dumpster's rusted side. Reacher's eyes flicked to the misstep, calculating reaction even as he moved, always one beat ahead. The man landed with a harsh thud, breath rasping as he curled onto his side. The other thugs froze, shock rippling through their ranks like a broken signal. She gasped, hand clenching the knife's handle tighter. Rain spattered against her coat, but the sound faded beneath the leader's frustrated roar. He bent to help his comrade, face contorted with anger and fear. Reacher didn't intervene. Instead, he let nature run its course. Chaos had a way of revealing true intent. The downed thug groaned, pushing himself up on unsteady legs. His hood slipped back, revealing wild eyes and a sweat-slicked face. He spat a curse, wiping a cut across his brow. Pride burned brighter than pain, and he lurched forward, intent on rejoining the retreat. But miscalculation followed miscalculation, his balance unsteady, limbs tangled. He rocked forward again, forehead colliding with the dumpster's corner in a dull crack. Stars flickered behind his eyes as he sank back to the ground, groaning now more in agony than defiance. Witnessing this, the remaining thugs exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. The leader clenched his fists, torn between loyalty and self-preservation. He jerked his head, signaling the others to keep moving. Reluctantly, they obeyed, dragging their wounded companion's arm as they receded down the alley, every step weighted with defeat. She watched them go, breath heaving, pulse easing as each shape faded into darkness. The fallen man lay where he'd collapsed, crumpled and forgotten, an unintended casualty of his own overconfidence. Reacher stepped forward, gaze sharp, yet he offered no pity. He surveyed the blood-slicked pavement, then met her eyes. In that moment, she realized that in his world, missteps carried consequences swift and unflinching. And tonight, justice had arrived unannounced, as brutal and precise as the alley shadows. He stood over the crumpled form of the first thug, coat tails brushing puddles, gaze fixed yet unreadable. Without a word, he crouched, the slick concrete releasing a faint squeak under the tension. His hand hovered above the man's shoulder, not in mercy, but as a silent gauge of intent. The thug's labored breaths fogged the air, eyes darting upward in panic. Reacher pressed a finger to the man's throat, gentle, almost caring, measuring the rapid pulse beneath. Then, with deliberate slowness, he withdrew, rising to full height. The alley's neon glow washed his profile in pale blue. She watched from the corner of her eye as he shifted, shoulders squared, scanning the exit route the remaining thugs had taken. His face was calm, but every muscle spoke readiness. There was an unspoken promise in his posture. Cross this line, and there would be no reprieve. The fallen thug whimpered, rolling onto his back. He fought to focus on Reacher's silhouette against the brick wall. The world had narrowed to that single figure, the silent arbiter of consequences. He tried to speak, voice trembling, but no sound came. Reacher paused, lean frame coiled like a spring. A single word, barely a breath, slid through the rain-laced air. Move. It wasn't a plea, it was a directive. The wounded man's heart pounded as he processed the command. He scrambled to his feet, hands twisting at the fabric of his hoodie, rain soaking in like a cold reminder. He took one tentative step, then another, eyes locked on Reacher's boots, counting each inch that separated escape from reckoning. Behind him, the alley's mouth yawned, a gateway back to shadows and anonymity. He inched toward it, shoulders hunched, each movement a negotiation with fear. When he finally crossed the threshold, Reacher's gaze followed him, unwavering. The rain began to lighten, the storm shifting. Reacher turned then, eyes finding the waitress. No apology, no flourish, just a look that cautioned. Some threats don't reveal themselves until it's too late. She nodded, understanding the unspoken truth. In a world of hidden dangers, the quietest warning often carried the greatest weight. The silence shattered as a shout cut through the alley, abrupt and furious. From around the corner, two of the thugs burst back, eyes wild and weapons drawn. One brandishing a broken bottle, the other hefting a length of pipe. Their retreat had been a ruse. Now they surged toward her and Reacher with desperate rage. Reacher's stance shifted in a fluid motion, feet planting firmly. The first thug swung the bottle low, glass whistling in a brutal arc. Reacher sidestepped, blade of broken glass missing him by inches, and yanked the man forward, using his momentum to send him sprawling into a heap against the dumpster. The second thug charged, pipe raised overhead. Reacher met him head-on, sliding under the swing and delivering an elbow into the attacker's ribs. The pipe clanged to the ground, and the thug reeled back, gasping. She stumbled backward, heart hammering, as Reacher pivoted toward the next threat. A third figure appeared at the alley's mouth, fists balled, charging like a bull. Reacher didn't hesitate. He launched forward, catching the man's shoulder and twisting him off balance. The thug crashed into the wall, sliding down in a crumpled heap. Rain spattered around them, turning the asphalt slick and treacherous. The two thugs on the ground struggled to rise, faces contorted with panic. Reacher loomed over them, unhurried but terrifyingly imminent. He spoke then, voice low and controlled. Enough. Their response was a choking wheeze, eyes flicking between Reacher's stone-cold gaze and the darkened exit behind them. Spread-eagled on the wet ground, they realized resistance had become a liability. She watched from the edge of the fray, breath caught. The broken bottle lay forgotten, a shard of menace in the pooling water. The remaining thugs, now only two, saw their wounded brothers and dropped their weapons, raising hands in surrender. Reacher's eyes swept the alley, ensuring no hidden pockets of danger remained. Then he turned to her, expression softening just a fraction. In the aftermath of violence that had erupted without warning, he offered her a steady hand to help her from the shadowed brink. Her breath hitched as she spotted the alley's end yawning open, an invitation to flee. The rain had eased to a mist, and in the dim glow of the street lamp, she could see a gap between two thugs still sprawled on the ground. Hope flared. She slipped forward, the knife still clutched at her side, eyes fixed on freedom. Each step seemed impossibly loud, echoing in her ears. Reacher had moved to secure the last pair, binding their hands with a length of her apron. He was turned away for only a moment. She risked a glance over her shoulder, his broad silhouette dark against peeling paint. He hadn't noticed. Seizing the chance, she stepped past him, heart pounding so loudly she was certain he'd hear. She reached the alley mouth and took one more step toward the street. Then a guttural shout tore from behind her. The leader, ragged and furious, lunged from the shadows, arms flailing. She spun, panic flaring as he caught her wrist, forcing her back toward the waiting thugs. Rain splashed over her as she stumbled, knife slipping in her grip. Reacher reacted in a heartbeat, pivoting on drenched pavement. His voice rang out calm but iron. Let her go. The leader froze, eyes wild, as Reacher advanced. One step, two, closing the gap like a stopping train. The waitress yanked her arm, tearing free, and bolted toward the exit again. Her legs burned. Adrenaline drove her feet faster than she thought possible. Splinters of loose gravel dug into her soles, but she paid them no mind. Behind her, the leader recovered and screamed, charging. She risked a glance to see Reacher intercept him, strike to the shoulder, sweep of the leg, and the thug crumpled without grappling her path. She didn't wait. She crossed into the street, where headlights painted her in stark white. Cars slowed, drivers staring. She dashed to a nearby fence, lungs burning, and climbed over. At the top, she paused, rain-damp hair plastered to her face. She dared to hope. Behind her, the alley receded into darkness, and she knew, regardless of where she ran next, she wasn't truly alone. He swung around just in time to see the leader rise, stumbling from the impact of Reacher's sweep. Rage contorted his features as he shook off pain and lunged forward, fist drawn back in a savage arc. The waitress froze, but Reacher didn't hesitate. He shifted just a fraction, baiting the blind strike. The punch connected with a sickening thud, fist sinking into Reacher's shoulder before he could fully sidestep. The force jolted him, shoulders dipping as he absorbed the blow. For a heartbeat, time stuttered, rain dripping from Reacher's brow, the leader's snarling mouth, the waitress's wide-eyed horror. Reacher's jaw tightened, the world narrowing to muscle and bone. He stepped in the punch, closing distance so the leader's balance tipped forward. With a fluid motion, Reacher pivoted, using the thug's momentum against him. The man pitched face first into the wet asphalt, teeth clattering on concrete. A hiss escaped the leader's lips as he tried to rise, blood trickling from a split lip. He spat the taste of iron, eyes burning with fury. Without pausing, he swung again. This time a wild haymaker aimed for Reacher's temple. Reacher caught the attacker's wrist in midair, twisting it until the second punch fizzled out in agony. He forced the man to his knees, strength tempered by control. Reacher's other hand remained ready, fingers curled, waiting. The leader's chest heaved, rain washing away the sweat mingled with blood. His defiance faltered as pain and fear mingled in his gaze. Reacher didn't speak. He simply tightened his grip, pressing down on the man's shoulder joint until a low groan broke free. The alley's damp air seemed to press in, every drop of rain now a witness to the brutality that true force could wield. The waitress stepped forward, heart pounding, and Reacher released the man's wrist. The leader slumped onto his side, defeated not just by the fall, but by the realization that brute aggression meant nothing against that quiet, unyielding strength. As he stood, Reacher glanced at her, steady, impeccable, untouchable. In that moment, she understood that violence without purpose was empty, but violence wielded with precision could protect a life as fiercely as any shield. She blinked as he straightened, rain dripping from his hair, muscles still coiled from the last exchange. The four remaining thugs stirred, half rising from the ground, confusion and pain etched across their features. Reacher stepped forward, boots splashing in shallow puddles, and the air shifted. Without a word, he reached into his coat and retrieved a length of heavy-duty zip tie. Borrowed, she realized, from the cook's prep station. He flipped it open, fingers moving with practiced ease. The nearest thug flinched, eyes widening as Reacher secured one wrist, then the other, cinching tight until the man's protest sputtered into helpless groans. She moved to help, gathering the fallen ties from the wet asphalt, her hands steady despite her pounding heart. Together, they worked methodically, one by one. Each thug was bound, arms crossed, legs tied where necessary, rendered immobile by the silent precision of the action. Not a single shout, not a single struggle escaped the damp hush. When the last knot was cinched, Reacher stood back, inspecting their work. The thugs lay in a staggered line, helpless amid discarded weapons. A broken bottle, a length of pipe, a handful of pebbles that had once crackled under their feet. The waitress slid the knife, now clean of dread, into his outstretched hand. He nodded in acknowledgement. She met his gaze, gratitude and awe mingling in her eyes. He offered a rare half-smile, tight and fleeting, before turning toward the mouth of the alley. The distant siren of a police cruiser hummed closer, lights flashing red and blue against rain-slicked walls. Reacher's figure seemed to lengthen in the neon glow as he approached the bound man, voice quiet but firm. They tried. You finish it. His words hung in the air, an unspoken instruction to the authorities arriving moments away. She watched as he stepped aside, allowing her space to slip past him. The world felt lighter, as if the alley had exhaled. She rose on tiptoes and pressed a soft thanks to his shoulder. He inclined his head, then melted back into the shadows as the police streamed in. In that drenched corridor, when fear had clawed at her life, he had stepped in, silent, precise, and unyielding, ensuring danger met its match in a stranger's quiet resolve. The police arrived in a flurry of flashing lights, boots thudding on wet pavement. Reacher moved with practiced speed, stepping forward to meet the lead officer as she barked orders in her radio. He held out the handful of zip ties, voice calm. Use these. Without hesitation, the officers fanned out, securing each thug with efficient precision. Reacher knelt beside the nearest man, guiding the officers' hands as they looped the ties around wrists and ankles. The metal click of cuffs would have taken longer. These improvised restraints held firm in seconds. She hovered nearby, watching the transformation of chaos into control. One thug still struggled, his bound wrists biting into his skin, but the second officer silenced him with a firm hand on the shoulder. The officers exchanged curt nods. No need for praise. The scene had shifted from her terror to their jurisdiction. Reacher moved down the line, checking each knot's tension, ensuring no one could slip free. In his shadow, the waitress found steady footing, stepping in only when a tie required adjustment. Her trembling hands now carried purpose, guiding the cords, looping once, then twice, sliding tight. A tall officer secured the last thug, sliding the zip tie around his ankles before stepping back. Reacher stood, brushing rainwater from his coat, eyes sweeping the bound figures. The police officers began reading rights, notebooks already open, pens scratching across pages. She exhaled, shoulders dropping for the first time. The weight that had pressed on her chest all night, fear, adrenaline, helplessness, lifted in that simple act of order restored. Reacher turned to her, offering a knowing glance that acknowledged both relief and lingering unease. An officer approached, hand extended. "Thank you," she said, voice steady despite her exhaustion. Reacher nodded, then retrieved the knife from her pocket, handing it off to the evidence officer. Each movement was deliberate, no theatrics, no lingering. As the last thug was led away, zip ties snapping under boots, the alley felt strangely empty. Reacher placed a hand on her shoulder, firm but gentle. The officers gave him space. They recognized his role in ending the threat. In the hush that followed, the rapid tie-ups stood as testament, swift, decisive, and irrevocable. Danger had arrived in numbers, but it was met and contained by a handful of steel-fast cords, and one man who moved like justice incarnate. The 5 men, once a looming blockade, now lay subdued in a grim tableau of defeat. Their limbs splayed, heaped against wet brick and discarded wrappers. They looked smaller, pathetic, stripped of swagger and menace. Reacher stepped back, allowing the police to finish their work. The officers moved among the captives, checking pulses, securing evidence, their measured efficiency contrasting sharply with the thugs' earlier brutality. One by one, the men tried to rise, only to slump back under the firm hands guiding them down. She stood beside Reacher, watching the transformation. These had been predators. Now they were prey, their arrogance stripped away by a single, unwavering presence. Their eyes, once full of contempt, now darted in panic, searching for an escape that no longer existed. Raindrops slid down the alley walls, carrying flecks of grime and blood into the puddles at their feet. A discarded bottle gleamed broken beside the nearest thug's head, a silent witness to the violence that had erupted. Yet here, in this moment, victory felt less about brutality and more about restoration. The night's darkness pushed back, order reclaimed. An officer straightened, calling into a radio. Scene secure. Another snapped photos, each click capturing the finality of submission. Reacher's gaze swept the group, ensuring no hidden threats remained. The largest man groaned, rolling onto his side, but Reacher's calm presence held him still. She exhaled, stepping forward to survey the scene herself. The alley bears marks of struggle. Scuffed paint, dented metal lids, a torn apron lying near the dumpster. But life persisted beyond these walls. The city's hum pulsed beyond the alley mouth. A heartbeat of normality resumed. Reacher offered her a glance. No words needed. Together, they had faced 5 assailants and prevailed. The thugs were overpowered not just by force, but by precision and resolve. As the police led the bound men away, their footsteps echoing down the corridor, she realized the true measure of strength. Control anchored in purpose, ensuring evil unraveled swiftly and without mercy. Police lights danced across the alley's slick walls as the thugs were led away, the echo of handcuffs snapping shut fading into the distance. She pressed her back against the cold brick, shoulders sagging as adrenaline drained from her limbs. The night air felt suddenly thin, each breath a reminder that the worst had passed. Through the haze of rain and relief, she heard sirens approaching. More than one. Their wail promised backup, paramedics, perhaps a patrol to secure the wider block. The sound grew louder, merging into a single, urgent chorus that filled the empty spaces. Reacher stood beside her, face half lit by the flashing reds and blues. His stance was relaxed now, tension released, but his eyes remained vigilant, always watching, always calculating. He glanced toward the alley mouth, where the oncoming vehicle slowed, tires hissing against wet pavement. She crossed her arms, glancing down at the spot where she dropped her apron in the chaos. A tiny pool of water gathered there, ripples spreading with each raindrop. It struck her how fragile safety could feel. One moment shattered by violence, the next pieced back together by swift action and a stranger's intervention. A patrol car rolled into view, halting at the alley's entrance. An officer stepped out, flashlight beam cutting a path through the gloom. He called out, voice crisp, "Are we clear here?" Reacher nodded once, stepping forward. "Clean." His words carried weight. The officer accepted them without question. She exhaled, voice trembling as she spoke. "I think they're going to need medical." One of them hit his head pretty hard. The officer agreed, calling it in. Sirens shifted pitch as an ambulance rounded the corner, headlights painting the scene in stark whites and greens. The EMTs unloaded their stretcher, moving toward the crumpled thug near the dumpster. She felt Reacher's presence at her back, steady and unintrusive. For a moment, she let herself lean against him, the warmth of his coat at her spine, a shield she hadn't known she craved. The sirens grew fainter as they drove off with flashing lights, leaving only the hum of the city and the soft drip of rain. In their wake, the alley felt reborn, wounded but healing, illuminated by the distant promise of care and order restored. The sky beyond the alley's mouth softened from inky black to a pale, steely gray as dawn crept over the rooftops. A single shaft of sunrise slanted through the narrow gap, illuminating the scattered debris. A snapped zip tie, a solitary glove, droplets of coffee that had spilled in the night's chaos. She stepped forward into the light, breathing in the cool morning air. Every atom felt cleansed by the rising sun, as if the city itself had exhaled, releasing the tension of darkness. The puddles at her feet mirrored the first hints of color, pink bleeding into gold, while distant traffic resumed its steady hum. Reacher remained in shadow, silhouette etched against the glow. He watched her with silent patience, as though granting her the first claim to the new day. She turned, brushing rain-slick hair from her face, and offered a small, tentative smile. He inclined his head in acknowledgement, the motion softening his stern features. She looked back down the alley at the battered walls and peeling posters, a stage for what felt like a lifetime condensed into a single night. Here, fear had ruled, then violence, and finally, salvation had arrived in the form of a quiet stranger.